Hello. This video is a call to action for moms in the US and dads if this situation applies to you, but it's pretty rare in this situation. The call to action is for anyone experiencing agencies who are committing grant fraud and ignoring the mandates and laws that they're required to do to assist victims specifically. The Office of the Inspector General is basically the man to agencies like FBI, DEA, BOP, DOJ, DOD. Any government agency and any subcontractor, any agency who's receiving grant funding, federal funding, is subject to audit by the Office of the Inspector General to make sure that they're doing their job and operating properly and effectively and efficiently. So basically, the complaint would be that the court, agencies like, in my case, the Children's Law Center, who's appointing guardian ad litem attorneys, law enforcement officers, judges, specific names. You're definitely going to need names. And then you're going to do a little bit of research regarding funding for Office of Violence Against Women, OVW, VAWA, JAG funding, COPS funding, justice programs, child abuse prevention funding. DSS also gets funding for these things, and a lot of this is for domestic violence victims and child abuse victims. Now, I've only researched North Carolina numbers, but I'm sure that we can find something in other states too, so definitely start digging. .gov sites, you can go on OIG audits and past awards and things like that for funding. So you're going to want to research what agencies get what money and for what reason. And then you're going to want to research your state laws and procedures. And for North Carolina, Chapter 7B is for abuse, neglect, and dependency, and Chapter 50B is for domestic violence. So the funding also requires the grantee to follow certain protocol and to meet certain requirements to receive these hundreds of millions of dollars to assist victims. So you're going to also want to research the statistics in your state. Child abuse substantiation and reports, mandated procedures for agencies, what requirements do they have to have? Also, the arrests annually, the charges annually for abuse, domestic violence, assault, offenses against family for the last 15 years. And also your state laws requiring your judge or anybody else to consider domestic violence when granting custody. So Chapter 50 in the North Carolina General Statutes addresses custody, but 50B is domestic violence. So you'd find that there for North Carolina. And also you're going to want to research the numbers for the actual victims of domestic violence homicide and how they're being recorded and how whether or not law enforcement is required to address what relationship the perpetrator and the victim had. And you're also going to want to look into what things were these grants for. So for domestic violence victims, it can be for legal assistance, housing, like I said, legal assistance, attorney, medical assistance, therapy, anything to stabilize her, encourage her, and get her on her feet, as well as protect her children. And as well for children, obviously medical treatment, protection, schooling, and there's a lot of other programs and a lot of other services that are supposed to be offered in these situations. So did the guardian ad litem, DSS, and the judge allow an abuser access and contact despite knowing the danger? Do we have proof they're on drugs? Do we have proof they're committing crimes? Do we have proof they're mentally unstable? Proof of previous acts of domestic violence, physical, sexual assault? Do we have proof the child has medical problems? Do we have the proof the child has been assaulted? Do we have proof that, you know, obviously he's unfit, unhealthy, and inappropriate to have unsupervised access to the child? If yes, and the judge gave him custody anyway or permitted him to do that, obviously we're not going with the guidelines, because the state of North Carolina mandates that judges consider prior acts of domestic violence when considering custody, but they do not. So in addition to that, you're going to go and look at the federal child abuse and prevention laws. Also, you know, in your experience, as well as if you can find another mom in your area with the same players, the same actors, that's very important. If you can find someone to also make a complaint with the same situation, that's going to get the audit focused faster. And that's the Gone Act. If you want to look up the Gone Act, that's when 2 reporters report with the same area. That's when things start happening. In North Carolina, it seems to be some kind of a local practice that law enforcement does not get involved in custody matters. So a child's being abused, neglected, molested, the mother's being stalked, harassed, tracked down, her house being broken into. She is at the highest risk ever in her domestic violence history with this abuser. The child risks death more than any other time. Yet law enforcement is indifferent and will not intervene. But in Chapter 7B, and I believe it's 7B 300 and 500, it addresses law enforcement being able to take action to protect an abused and neglected child, or even to take her out of a place where she knows someone else is permitting abuse and faces no repercussions, and has the ability and the authority to do so. So that's something I actually brought up today with internal affairs as to things that these detectives are not doing and acting as though they cannot, but they can. So like the Children's Law Center appointed a guardian ad litem. The guardian ad litem was appointed, like in North Carolina, GAL attorneys are appointed if there is any allegation of abuse or neglect. So if they are appointed for domestic violence and abuse or neglect, which the Children's Law Center on their website states that they're there for conflict and domestic violence. However, a guardian ad litem is only appointed when there's abuse. So if we're saying there's all this conflict and we're calling it conflict, then the guardian ad litem's coming in and acting completely inappropriately and ignoring all the signs and assisting the court with granting the abusive parent custody. And this is definitely something that's happening a lot around North Carolina with these larger cities. I actually met another mom tonight. Same situation with the court, just out of control. So what they're doing is creating conflict by ordering custody or unsupervised visitation or unsafe practices by giving access to these abusive men, whether or not they're on drugs, whether or not they're putting the children's life at risk, or they're trying to kill the mother. It doesn't seem to matter. And so obviously the conflict will continue. The mother will come back. She'll pay child support on time. And obviously the deficit for arrears being the lowest it hasn't been in 20 years. And that's because the mothers are paying child support. Not many people know, but abusers are getting custody of children at an alarming rate, and I believe this is why. And if we want to change something, we're going to have to start with the money. Unfortunately, this seems to be much more important than innocent children's lives and the next generation. So if the court is refusing to acknowledge domestic violence whatsoever, you definitely need the names of all these people. So if the court is not granting domestic violence protective orders, enforcing them, or honoring them, especially, obviously, if you're having family court matters, that's important. If there's no laws being followed, and are they taking the danger seriously? Are they taken the procedures of the appointees seriously to have oversight and to make sure that the children are being protected. So in North Carolina and Forsyth County and in these other counties, DSS is not substantiating, meaning saying that abuse is actually happening. So if we have a guardian ad litem attorney there for all this conflict, domestic violence, then we say there is no domestic violence. We just say, oh, she says there used to be, but we believe everything he says too. We just base everything on the hearsay. We don't investigate. We really don't care what he does. We're just here for this. And then we've got the judge able to discredit the mother because the abuse was never substantiated. The abuse never stops. The child's life is one of suffering, and any investigation is tainted because we're giving children to abusers without supervision. So obviously this child is going to be shut down and they're never going to talk. So the abuse continues. The victims never get to be called victims. We just call it conflict. But they don't get counted on the numbers of victims, which would lower the money in the pockets of those that are abusing their power and exploiting victims of North Carolina. And the fallout is the increase of murder victims of women and children. In North Carolina, it's pretty apparent by looking at the numbers, official numbers, not the ones the state are giving. Well, DHHS, the ones they're giving is definitely not accurate. We're looking at the numbers and looking at the incline based on national numbers. It's very clear that the numbers are being manipulated, and the relationships between these women being killed and their former partners are not being acknowledged, nor is it even an option to put ex-boyfriend or estranged lover or father of child. Women who left the abuse, you know, the ones you say, why didn't she leave him? God, she finally left him. So proud of you. Did you know that it gets so much worse? The worst abuse she's ever experienced in her life, and he does not have to punch her or rape her for her to feel it. He's got access to the love of her life, her babies. And when the courts don't do the right thing and they exploit the power given to them to keep children and women safe, and they don't become educated or choose to be educated on the facts, meaning that the chance of death and severe abuse for women and children increase times, I don't even know, when she ends the relationship. So when she's being forced to correspond and communicate and meet and see the abusive man, allowing her children, which she knows are being abused because they're telling her, then we're telling this woman that she's mentally ill because she is crying and she is so upset because she can't protect her baby. And the rest of the world seems to kind of go with it. Like, how could this be going on? How could all these people be against this woman? It's not about that. It's about the money. And the news stories you see of all these women and children being murdered is not being reflected officially because they're not being called domestic violence victims. In addition to all of these murder suicides of these men and these children not being reflected appropriately to acknowledge that most likely she asked for help. Most likely she told the judge. Most likely she tried to get a protective order and protect herself, and she called the police. They all got funding for that, but they never helped her. And that's why it's time for us to hit them in the pockets. So if the agencies appointed to you that are getting federal funding are causing conflict intentionally by giving an abuser custody and unsupervised visitation despite the knowledge of danger, exploiting children, exposing children to violence, giving the abuser assistance, not prosecuting or investigating or arresting perpetrators of abuse, and not protecting victims, it's time to call the Office of the Inspector General. That number is 1-866-680-7963. In order to complete your report, you can call and make a report or go online. You can remain anonymous or choose to give your name, but if you give details that show it's you, it's going to come out anyway. allow at least an hour for this call. And always remember that you need to get to the end of the call where you are given a report number and a PIN number of the report, or the report does not happen. My phone kept hanging up and I had to like make numerous reports, but they didn't go through until I actually got a PIN number and a report number. You can go back later and add to a report. And like I said, strongly suggest trying to find another mom in your jurisdiction with the same actors and same loss. I definitely have some more ideas regarding this. Also, writing letters to the Melinda Gates Foundation. I also, I had a lot going on my last Facebook and my support group, but I kind of had to start over. So, sending my love out to all of you all. Please share this. It is a call to action. And the action is going to be putting these hundreds of millions of dollars in the hands of victims, women and children, the victims that it was meant for. It's time to recognize the facts and hold these people accountable and remove them from any kind of authority position whatsoever, so we can get people in there that want to promote love and peace for the next generation instead of conflict. Peace.